The first crack in Ethan Caldwell's world appeared 3 months before his 45th birthday. Over dinner, his wife, Samantha, set her phone face down on the table, but not before Ethan caught the flash of a name, one he didn't recognize. She claimed it was a work emergency, brushing off his concern with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is it the Emerson case?" he asked, his tone careful, watching her move to gather her things. "No, another client," she said, avoiding his gaze as she reached for her coat. "Don't wait up for me." Ethan watched her walk out the door, the sharp click of her heels echoing in his mind long after she left. His wife of 15 years had always been ambitious, a trait he admired. But something in her tone, a forced casualness that wasn't there before, set him on edge. That night, curiosity led him to track her phone's location. The glowing dot on his screen settled at a boutique hotel downtown, nowhere near her supposed client's office. The next morning, Samantha returned home with her usual precision, her alibi perfectly rehearsed. "Neutral ground for settlement talks," she explained. "Standard practice." Her calm demeanor and steady eye contact would have convinced anyone, except Ethan. He knew her too well. From that moment, Ethan began to notice the little things. Samantha's sudden interest in yoga classes she'd never invited him to join, the expensive lingerie tucked into her drawer that he'd never seen her wear, and the late-night texts from unknown numbers. Bit by bit, his once picturesque marriage began to crumble under the weight of suspicion. But Ethan didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed proof. On the evening of his birthday, Ethan meticulously prepared dinner, slicing herbs for the salmon, Samantha's favorite. He poured himself into the routine, trying to drown out the sinking feeling in his gut. When she walked through the door, her makeup flawless and a new designer bag slung over her shoulder, Ethan saw the exhaustion she claimed to feel wasn't physical but emotional, a facade cracking at the edges. "Happy birthday," she said with a forced smile, offering her cheek when he moved in to kiss her. As the evening wore on, she made her excuses. A migraine, she claimed, too tired to eat the meal he'd worked all day to prepare. When she retreated upstairs to rest, Ethan was left alone with an untouched table and a heart heavier than it had ever been. Later that night, a message buzzed on Ethan's phone, an unknown number with a single video attachment. The thumbnail image alone was enough to make his blood run cold. He pressed play, and the scene that unfolded on the screen shattered his world. Samantha, their bedroom, another man. The man was younger, muscular, and familiar. Ethan recognized him from the firm's holiday party, a junior partner named Damien, who had been charming and friendly that evening, even offering advice on a renovation project Ethan had mentioned. Now, Damien's laughter echoed through the video as Samantha's voice broke the air, dripping with disdain. "You're so much better than him," she whispered. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away, even as bile rose in his throat. When the video ended, a message appeared beneath it. "Happy birthday. Your wife is mine." Ethan spent the rest of the night in a daze, unable to sleep as Samantha lay beside him, her breath slow and even. But when the sun rose, so did Ethan's resolve. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to be patient, methodical. They thought they had won, that they had humiliated him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The days that followed Ethan's birthday were a blur of careful observation and quiet planning. Samantha moved through the house as though nothing had changed, her smile rehearsed, her excuses practiced. Ethan played the role of the oblivious husband to perfection, hiding the storm brewing behind his calm demeanor. When Samantha claimed she had a late meeting one evening, Ethan waited until she left before pulling out the small packages that had arrived earlier that day. Surveillance equipment, cameras no larger than a button, discrete microphones with extended battery life, and GPS trackers lay neatly in a row on his desk. He'd spent hours researching and selecting the best tools for his plan, ensuring every purchase was untraceable. The first device he installed was in their bedroom. His hands trembled slightly as he positioned the tiny camera inside a decorative vent, ensuring it had a full view of the bed. This was where she betrayed him, where she brought another man into the sanctity of their home. The thought made his jaw clench, but he forced himself to focus. By the time Samantha returned home that night, Ethan had installed cameras in the living room, kitchen, and her home office. Each device was strategically placed, hidden in plain sight. He even concealed a microphone in the car she loved so much, the one he'd bought her for their 10th anniversary. "Still up?" she asked when she found him in his office, illuminated by the soft glow of his laptop screen. "Just finishing some work," Ethan replied, keeping his tone neutral. He glanced up and offered her a small smile. "How was the meeting?" "Exhausting," she said, running a hand through her hair. "I'm heading to bed." "Good night," he said, watching her retreat down the hall. Once he was sure she was asleep, Ethan opened his laptop and connected to the live feeds from the cameras. Every angle of their home appeared on his screen, silent and still. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt in control. If Samantha wanted to play games, he would make sure he never missed a single move. It didn't take long for the cameras to confirm Ethan's suspicions. Over the next few weeks, Samantha's behavior became more predictable. Tuesday and Thursday evenings were her preferred times for client meetings. Her texts and calls grew more frequent, but she was careful to angle her phone away from him whenever she typed. One Thursday, Ethan watched as Samantha returned home earlier than expected. She was dressed in a sleek black dress he hadn't seen before, her makeup fresh and flawless. As she passed by the living room camera, she paused to check her reflection in the mirror, adjusting the neckline of her dress with a faint smile. Ethan switched to the feed from her car. Damien's voice came through the microphone, low and teasing. "Did he suspect anything?" "Of course not," Samantha replied with a laugh. "Ethan wouldn't notice if I walked in with another man's shirt on." The rage that simmered in Ethan's chest was tempered only by his growing determination. He saved the recording, adding it to a growing collection of evidence. Every lie she told, every betrayal she committed, was another nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed life. By the time Ethan had enough evidence to confirm the full scope of Samantha's infidelity, he had also pieced together a detailed profile of Damien. A rising star at Samantha's law firm, Damien was charming, ambitious, and utterly unscrupulous. Ethan learned that Damien had a history of affairs with married women, most of whom were connected to the firm. He even uncovered rumors of hush money paid to an intern several years ago. Ethan's plan was methodical and multi-layered. He started by creating anonymous accounts to disseminate the information he had collected. Financial records from Samantha's firm, questionable transactions linked to Damien, and footage of their illicit meetings were all meticulously cataloged. He ensured that the trail led back to Samantha and Damien, implicating them in a scandal that would ruin their careers. Next, Ethan began planting seeds of doubt. A cryptic message left in Samantha's car, a phone call to Damien's office that went unanswered, a friend at the firm dropping hints about an internal investigation, all designed to make them uneasy, to unsettle their confidence. When Samantha asked one evening if everything was okay, Ethan smiled and kissed her cheek. "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't it be?" She didn't notice the way his eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, or the faint smile that played at the corners of his lips as she turned away. Damien Wolf leaned back in his office chair, the sleek leather creaking as he scrolled through his phone. His jaw tightened when he came across yet another anonymous email in his inbox. Subject: "You're not as smart as you think." Body: "How long before everyone knows? Better watch your back." The attached image was blurry but unmistakable. Him and Samantha in a heated embrace outside the Golden Crown Hotel. Damien quickly deleted the message, his heart racing. It wasn't the first email he'd received that week, and he doubted it would be the last. He glanced at his office door, ensuring it was shut, then called Samantha. "We need to talk," he said as soon as she answered. "Damien," she whispered, her tone sharp. "I'm in a meeting. This can't wait," he said, lowering his voice. "Someone's on to us." Her silence was enough to confirm she wasn't as unaffected as she pretended. "We'll talk later," she said, and the line went dead. Back at home, Ethan watched the exchange through Damien's phone tracker, the audio crystal clear. He leaned back in his chair, satisfaction curling the corners of his mouth. The paranoia he'd planted was taking root. It was only a matter of time before it consumed them both. Samantha returned home that evening with an edge to her voice and tension in her movements. Ethan observed her carefully as she entered the kitchen, dropping her bag on the counter with a thud. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice warm and steady. "Exhausting," she muttered, grabbing a glass and pouring herself some wine. He stepped closer, feigning concern. "You've been working so hard lately. Maybe we should take a weekend off. Get away from everything." Samantha froze, the glass halfway to her lips. "A weekend? Why not?" Ethan said, shrugging. "We could go to the lake house. You've been so stressed. It might be good for both of us." Her eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place. Fear? Guilt? "I'll think about it," she said, her tone distant. Ethan smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Take your time." Later that night, as Samantha showered, Ethan reviewed the footage from earlier that day. Samantha had met Damien at a small cafe downtown, their conversation punctuated by furtive glances and whispered words. "I can't do this if you're going to fall apart," Samantha hissed, her tone sharp. Damien's expression darkened. "I'm not falling apart, but we need to be careful. Someone's watching us." "I told you, Ethan doesn't suspect a thing," Samantha said. Ethan paused the video, his jaw tightening. She really believed him to be that blind, that stupid. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. "Not for much longer," he muttered. The following week, Ethan set the final stage of his plan into motion. Using an encrypted email, he sent anonymous tips to Damien's firm, pointing to discrepancies in his billing records and potential conflicts of interest. The emails included enough legitimate details to pique interest, but not enough to reveal Ethan's involvement. At the same time, he scheduled an anonymous drop of Samantha's financial documents to her firm's compliance department. It was subtle, just enough to raise questions about her handling of client accounts. He didn't need them to be fired outright. Suspicion was enough to destabilize their lives and make them second-guess every decision. By the time Ethan's supposed business trip arrived, Samantha and Damien were already unraveling. Damien's paranoia had grown into full-blown anxiety, while Samantha struggled to keep her lies straight. Ethan packed his suitcase and kissed Samantha goodbye at the front door. "Don't miss me too much," he said, his tone laced with subtle irony. Samantha forced a smile. "Be safe." As he climbed into the cab, waiting outside, Ethan felt the weight of the gun in his carry-on. It was clean and untraceable, another element of the plan he'd meticulously crafted. The moment he arrived at the hotel, he set up his mobile command center. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from the cameras in their home. At 7:30 p.m., Damien's sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Ethan watched as Samantha greeted Damien at the door, her laughter ringing hollow through the speakers. The cameras captured every moment, every kiss, every whisper, every smirk at his expense. When they moved upstairs, Ethan closed his laptop and grabbed his carry-on. His hands were steady, his heart calm. The drive back to the house was eerily silent, the streets dark and empty. As he pulled into the driveway, he noted Damien's car parked carelessly at an angle. Ethan climbed the stairs silently, the gun concealed in his jacket. The bedroom door was ajar, light spilling into the hallway. He pushed the door open. "What the?" Damien started, scrambling for his clothes. "Ethan?" Samantha's voice was high-pitched, trembling. Ethan stepped inside, his gaze cold and unyielding. "Surprised to see me?" "Ethan." Samantha's voice wavered as she clutched the bedsheet to her chest. Her perfect composure had vanished, replaced by panic. "You're supposed to be in Chicago. Your flight." Ethan cut her off with a quiet laugh, the sound cold and devoid of humor. "My flight? My meetings? The story you fed me, thinking I'd swallow it whole, just like all your other lies?" Damien, now fully aware of the threat in the room, stood slowly. His Navy SEAL training kicked in, his posture tense but calculating. "Look, Ethan, we can talk about this. No one needs to get hurt." Ethan's gaze shifted to Damien, and a chilling smile spread across his face. "Talk? You mean like how you talked about me in that video? Pathetic, wasn't it? That's the word you used, right?" Damien froze, realization dawning. "You've been watching us?" "Every move," Ethan said, pulling out his phone and tossing it onto the bed. The screen displayed a live feed of them together, captured from multiple angles in the room. "You didn't think you were the only one capable of playing dirty, did you?" Samantha's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Ethan, this isn't what it looks like. Ethan raised an eyebrow. It's exactly what it looks like. And now, the whole world will know too. Damien lunged, but Ethan moved faster, pulling a small, untraceable handgun from his jacket and aiming it directly at him. Ethan said coolly. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Damien froze, his hands raised. Think about what you're doing. You pull that trigger, and your life is over. My life, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly, the first crack in his icy facade. My life ended the day I found out you were screwing my wife in my bed. Samantha stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Please, Ethan, don't do this. We can fix this. We can. Fix this? Ethan's laugh was bitter and sharp. You want to fix this now? After months of lies, after humiliating me, after turning our marriage into a joke? No, Samantha. There's no fixing this. He tossed a manila envelope onto the bed. Inside that envelope are copies of everything. The videos, the texts, the financial records. Did you think I wouldn't notice the money you were siphoning out of our accounts? Or the firm's? Damien's face went pale. You have no proof? Ethan smirked. Oh, I have more than proof. The partners at your firm received a little package earlier tonight. I'm sure they're enjoying the highlight reel as we speak. You're bluffing, Damien said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Ethan gestured toward Samantha's phone on the nightstand. Check it. Go ahead. See the chaos I've unleashed. Samantha grabbed her phone with trembling hands. Notifications lit up the screen. Emails, news alerts, messages from colleagues. Her breath caught as she read the headlines. Scandal at prestigious law firm. Partners accused of embezzlement and affairs. Exclusive footage exposes illicit activities of senior attorneys. Samantha's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the bed, her face buried in her hands. What have you done? She whispered. What you thought I'd never do, Ethan replied, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. I fought back. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by Samantha's muffled sobs. Damien shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the door. Ethan noticed and shook his head. Don't even think about it. You're making a mistake, Damien said. The police. We'll find a very different story. Ethan interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. See, I've set the stage perfectly. The evidence points to you, Damien. The emails, the bank accounts, the offshore transfers, it's all tied back to you and Samantha. When the authorities show up, you'll be the one explaining. You're insane, Samantha whispered. No, Samantha, Ethan said, leaning closer, his voice low and lethal. I'm thorough. Something you clearly underestimated. He slid the gun across the bed toward her. Here's how this ends. When the police arrive, they'll find you both here. The cameras will tell them everything they need to know about your betrayal, about your argument, and about the moment things got out of hand. Samantha's head shot up, her tear-streaked face twisting in horror. No, Ethan, please. You have 5 minutes, Ethan said, straightening. Make it look convincing. Damien lunged for the gun, but Samantha grabbed it first, her hands trembling. Don't, she cried, pointing it at him. Ethan stepped back toward the door, his expression calm. Good luck explaining how you two destroyed each other. Wait, Samantha screamed. You can't just leave us like this. Ethan turned, his gaze cold and unrelenting. Oh, but I can. Enjoy the fallout. He stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him. As he descended the stairs, he heard raised voices and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. A single gunshot echoed through the house. By the time the police arrived, Ethan was sitting in a nearby cafe, sipping coffee and casually scrolling through his phone. The news had already broken. Headlines screaming about the scandal at Samantha's law firm, the financial crimes, and the tragic domestic incident at the Caldwell residence. The detective who approached him at the cafe was young, his expression sympathetic. Mr. Caldwell? Yes, Ethan said, looking up with feigned surprise. There's been an incident at your home. Ethan nodded slowly, his mask of shock and grief firmly in place. My wife, is she okay? The detective hesitated. We're still gathering details, but it appears there was an altercation. We'll need you to come with us. Ethan rose, his movements deliberate and calm. Of course, as they left the cafe, Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from an encrypted number. All loose ends tied. Safe travels. Ethan smiled to himself, the weight of his old life falling away. Soon, he'd be boarding a plane to a new beginning, a life free from the lies and betrayal that had once defined him. Behind him, the chaos he'd left in his wake would smolder for years to come. Ethan sat in the airport lounge, a whiskey on the rocks sweating in his hand. The faint hum of travelers moving through the terminal buzzed around him, blending with the rhythmic clinking of ice against his glass. On the screen above the bar, a breaking news report flickered to life. Developments in the Caldwell scandal. High-profile lawyers face charges of embezzlement and fraud following tragic incident. The anchor's voice was measured, professional. Samantha Caldwell, senior partner at esteemed law firm Ashcroft & Associates, and Damian Wolf, a junior partner, are at the center of a legal and personal scandal that has rocked the community. Wolf remains in critical condition following an alleged domestic dispute at the Caldwell residence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Caldwell is being held without bail as authorities investigate accusations of financial crimes and ethical violations. This is a developing story. Ethan took a slow sip of his drink, letting the burn trail down his throat. The news cut to footage of the Caldwell house, yellow police tape fluttering in the wind. The door to his old life, once pristine, was now a crime scene. Good, he thought. Let them see the ashes they've made. As he waited for his flight, Ethan opened his laptop, connecting to the secure server he'd set up months ago. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence he'd gathered was backed up and encrypted. He scrolled through the neatly labeled folders. Video evidence, financial records, firm embezzlement scheme, Wolf's past affairs. Each was a reminder of the intricate web he'd spun, a testament to his meticulous planning. Ethan opened a private browser and accessed the dummy email account he'd used to contact journalists, law enforcement, and the Bar Association. Messages flooded the inbox. Reporters seeking comment, lawyers asking for additional evidence, and even a few personal notes from individuals who had suffered under Wolf's manipulation. One stood out. Subject: thank you. From Anonymous. I don't know who you are, but you've given me the courage to come forward. I've been afraid for years, but now I see there's justice for people like me. Thank you. Ethan closed the laptop, a faint smile playing on his lips. Justice, indeed. When Ethan's flight landed in Lisbon, Portugal, he stepped off the plane feeling lighter than he had in years. The Mediterranean air was warm, carrying the scent of salt water and fresh citrus. The small villa he'd rented stood atop a hill overlooking the ocean. The solitude was exactly what he needed, a clean break from the tangled mess of his former life. He spent his days hiking the rocky coastline, exploring the local markets, and blending into a community that didn't ask too many questions. He introduced himself as Michael Reed, a writer working on a travel book. The name was forgettable, the story unremarkable, perfectly designed to keep anyone from looking too closely. At night, though, the ghosts of his past crept in. The betrayal, the lies, the cold satisfaction of watching Samantha and Damian fall apart. He found himself replaying the confrontation in his mind, the look of panic on Samantha's face, the dawning horror in Damian's eyes. He didn't regret what he'd done, but a part of him, a small, quiet part, wondered if he'd become the monster they believed him to be. Months passed, and Ethan's name faded from the headlines. Samantha's trial dominated the news for weeks, her downfall a cautionary tale for the elite. The financial crimes alone carried a sentence of up to 25 years, and with the evidence Ethan had planted, her conviction was inevitable. Damian, meanwhile, survived his injuries but emerged a broken man. Disbarred and publicly disgraced, he disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled about his whereabouts, a rehab facility, an overseas retreat, but Ethan didn't care. They were finished. One evening, as Ethan watched the sun dip below the horizon, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the encrypted number he'd used during the operation. Everything is in place. Funds transferred. No traces. He closed the message, his mind briefly wandering to the offshore accounts he'd set up using Samantha's and Damien's stolen credentials. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd turned their crimes into his own escape plan. Ethan was sipping espresso at a small cafe one morning when a familiar figure entered his peripheral vision. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, a trick of the light or his imagination. But when the woman approached his table, her hesitant smile told him otherwise. "Ethan," she said softly. It was Rachel. His stomach dropped. She was the one person who had come close to unraveling his plan. Her quiet warnings and growing guilt had made her a loose thread he hadn't pulled for fear of unraveling the entire operation. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with suspicion. "I could ask you the same," she said, sitting across from him. "Except I know the answer. You ran." "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, leaning back in his chair. Rachel shook her head. "Don't play dumb. I pieced it together. The cameras, the emails, the timing of your trip. It all leads back to you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If you know so much, why are you here?" She leaned closer, her expression a mix of determination and something else. "Admiration?" "To thank you," she said. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. Samantha and Damien deserved everything they got." But what?" Her gaze softened. "I want to know if you can live with it. What you became to destroy them." Ethan said nothing, the weight of her words settling between them. "I hope it was worth it," Rachel said, standing to leave. "Because revenge doesn't give you peace, Ethan. It just leaves you empty." As she walked away, Ethan stared into his espresso, her words echoing in his mind. Was it worth it? The question lingered unanswered as the sun climbed higher over the city. Rachel's visit unsettled Ethan in ways he didn't expect. For weeks, he replayed her words in his mind, dissecting every nuance of their brief conversation. Revenge doesn't give you peace. It just leaves you empty. The truth of it gnawed at him during the quiet moments. Those long nights alone in his villa or mornings when he wandered the coastal paths, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs. But peace had never been the goal. It wasn't about feeling better. It was about ensuring Samantha and Damien felt the weight of their choices, the same crushing weight they'd forced onto him. Still, Rachel's question, was it worth it, stuck in his mind like a splinter. The trial was a spectacle. Every major news outlet covered it, broadcasting Samantha Caldwell's downfall to the world. Witness after witness came forward, corroborating the financial misconduct and ethical breaches Ethan had orchestrated for months. The prosecution's star witness, surprisingly, was Rachel. She testified about Samantha's manipulative tendencies and the toxic environment she fostered at the firm. Rachel didn't know about Ethan's role, but her testimony was damning nonetheless. In a final twist, Damien testified against Samantha in exchange for a lighter sentence. She orchestrated the embezzlement, Damien said, his voice steady but hollow. "I was complicit, yes, but she was the mastermind." Watching the courtroom footage from a cafe in Lisbon, Ethan couldn't help but smirk. Damien's betrayal was the final nail in Samantha's coffin. When the guilty verdict was announced, Ethan raised a glass in quiet celebration. Samantha was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Damien, though spared prison, was fined heavily and barred from practicing law. They were both ruined. Months after the trial, Ethan received an email from Rachel. The subject line was simple. "I hope you're okay." Ethan debated ignoring it, but eventually opened the message. "Ethan, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're doing better. I thought you should know that Samantha has been writing letters from prison. To you. I don't know what they say. She didn't send them to your old address, but it's clear she's struggling. I thought you might want to know. Take care of yourself. Rachel." Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't given Samantha a second thought since the trial. The idea that she was still thinking of him, still trying to reach him, stirred something deep and uncomfortable. Several weeks later, Ethan found himself curious enough to follow up. Through a contact in the U.S., he arranged to have the letters forwarded to him. They arrived in a thick, battered envelope, postmarked from the correctional facility where Samantha now resided. He hesitated before opening the first one, unsure if he even wanted to hear her words. "Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it anyway. I was wrong. About everything. About us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything I did to you. Every lie, every betrayal. The letters continued in a similar vein, a mix of apologies, confessions, and desperate attempts to explain herself. She spoke of loneliness, of guilt that consumed her, and of sleepless nights replaying every decision that led to her downfall. One line stood out. You were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it. I destroyed you. Ethan set the letters aside, unsure how to feel. Ethan burned the letters in the fireplace that evening, watching the flames consume Samantha's words. It felt symbolic, an act of closure. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think about what came next. His revenge had been exacted. His enemies had fallen. The weight of his old life no longer pressed down on him. But what did that leave? He began to write, not about revenge or betrayal, but about the small, quiet joys of his new life. The cafe where the owner greeted him by name. The elderly couple who sold fresh oranges at the market. The young boy who waved at him every morning on his way to school. Ethan didn't know if his writing would lead anywhere, but it felt like a step forward. Months later, Ethan received a call from a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. Ethan, the voice said. It was Rachel. What is it? He asked, his tone guarded. I thought you want to know. Samantha's gone. She took her own life last night. The words hit him harder than he expected. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. She left a note, Rachel continued. It was addressed to you. Ethan swallowed hard. What did it say? She said she deserved what happened to her, but she wanted you to know she never stopped loving you. The line went quiet as Ethan processed her words. When he finally responded, his voice was soft. Thank you, Rachel. Ethan didn't dwell on Samantha's death. He couldn't. To do so would risk pulling himself back into the darkness he had fought so hard to escape. Instead, he focused on the life he was building, the one that had nothing to do with revenge or betrayal. He found solace in the mundane, the routine of brewing coffee in the morning, the warmth of the sun on his face, the sound of waves crashing against the shore. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was enough.